I made a dessert and our neighbor tried it and he said, my mom used to make that. Like it brought him back to when his mom would make those things. And to me, that's the ultimate compliment. You're able to trigger some of those memories and it's happy memories.
Welcome to Funeral Potatoes and Wool Mittens, a show for people who embrace the warm and cozy spirit of everyday living in the Midwest. From the blog Random Sweets, I'm your host, Stacy Mergenthal. This is a classic story of two Midwesterners becoming friends over Grandma's handed-down rhubarb muffin recipe. Growing up in New Richmond, Wisconsin, Shannon Thomaser's grandmothers, aunts, and her mom were great Midwestern cooks. Even so, she didn't watch or pay attention to how they worked their magic in the kitchen or with their recipes. Her job was to set the table and clean up after dinner. Well, eventually they rubbed off on her, and she is here today to share quite a few recipes, funny chicken stories, and recommendations for coney dogs, Mexican and Vietnamese meals, and bread and pastries in the Twin Cities. Plus, she has some really neat and fun itineraries for road trips in Wisconsin along the Mississippi River. So while you're listening, or when you can be on the internet, you'll find those links and pictures and some of those recipes that we talk about today on randomsweets.com. Now, if you like this episode, please recommend the show to your friends. Shannon, welcome to the show. I know that this is going to be fun because we don't know each other. Like, this is the first time we've seen each other, but I already know just by looking at your Instagram. I mean, you are the epitome of a Midwesterner. And I didn't even know when I asked, hey, do you want to come on the podcast? I didn't even know. But I'll tell you why I knew that you were a Midwesterner. But first of all, you raise chickens, you garden, you submitted knitting and baking to the fair, to a local fair, right? A county fair. I think you just recently made some tomato sauce. You have goats running around your yard. I know that you bake, you cook, you enjoy cocktails out on the patio. And here's the most telling sign that you're a Midwesterner. So you shared your grandma's rhubarb muffin recipe with me as a stranger. You just offered up, hey, I had posted a picture of the really red rhubarb I picked up at Sanderson Gardens. And you said, I have my grandma's rhubarb muffin recipe if you want it. And you shared it with me. I said, hey, will you come on the podcast? And it didn't even dawn on me, like, what if she's not from the Midwest? I didn't even think about it because I figured if you have a rhubarb recipe, you either live here or you have ties here.
That's right. That's right. Well, in that recipe, it's infamous. When we have people come visit, that's what I bake. We share our rhubarb, and there's just something about the muffin that is so fantastic that I just knew that you had to have it and give it a try. Yeah.
And you're right. We're going to talk about that when we get to talking about recipes and stuff. But first, I just want you to tell me about yourself and where you live, because where you live and where you work are two different states.
Exactly. Yes, you're right. So my name is Shannon Thomaser. I grew up in New Richmond, Wisconsin, which is just east of Stillwater, Minnesota. For those that are familiar with the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, Wisconsin and Minnesota are divided by the St. Croix River that meets up with the Mississippi. So grew up in New Richmond, lived in the Twin Cities for a short time as an adult, went to UW River Falls for school, stayed there for a long time, and now I'm just 8 miles south of Prescott, Wisconsin. So I'm just south of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, along the river. So from my front porch, I sit in Wisconsin, but I see Minnesota. So
you're right on the river then.
We're right on the river. We're on a hill, so there's about a half a mile of our road that leads up to a bluff. And then from there, the river's right there. And then you can see over towards Hastings, Minnesota. It's beautiful. A lot of our friends have cabins up north. We don't have that, but for us, where we live out in the country with some woods and a little bit of land is our dream. And then I work in Roseville, Minnesota for Visit Roseville. And you were saying I work in one state, live in another. And Roseville, we like to say, is perfectly positioned. It's right between Minneapolis and St. Paul, just a little bit north. And a lot of people are familiar with Rosedale Center. It's a shopping destination. We're a mile from the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. The fair starts in 2 days. So I just love this area. You can be in the Twin Cities, go to museums and different things like that, but within half an hour, you can be out in the country and do some hiking and kayaking and things like that.
Mm-hmm. What do you do at Visit Roseville?
I'm the director of sales, so I work with groups that have a need for meeting space or guest rooms. Visit Roseville is a marketing destination organization. So we market Roseville for local, regional, national, and people come to the area. They might have a meeting in Minneapolis, but don't want to stay downtown, or if downtown's full. So there's a lot of attractions, restaurants, things to do in Roseville. And we have 12 hotels. And so my job is to make sure that people are aware of what's available and things to do when they're here. So it's a nice hub to stay and then venture out for Minneapolis and St. Paul. The biggest group that we just had in the area is for the USA Cup soccer tournament that takes place in Blaine, Minnesota. And I'm
Okay.
trying to remember, it's thousands of kids that come in to play, and it was something like 12 different countries. So we get a lot of those people that come in and play and then venture out and do different things while they're here.
So tell me about your family.
So my husband, Tom, and I live in Prescott, or just right outside of Prescott. We have a daughter and son-in-law that are out near Seattle. So we don't get to
Mm,
see them as often as we want to, but thank goodness for Facebook and texting and things like that. So they're out there. And then we have a son, Jack, who's going to be a junior, just starting at Madison, UW-Madison next week. We move him down there, so we're pretty excited about that. And then we have Jonah, who's going to be a sophomore in high school. So he's in the middle of mowing lawn for the neighbors to make some money, and then football practice started. So
okay.
it's pretty busy. Has his driver's permit, so he's very excited about not having mom take him everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, my parents still live in New Richmond. Our extended family is down by Menominee, Wisconsin. So if you head a little bit more east into Wisconsin from the Minnesota-Wisconsin border, they're down by Menominee, Elmwood, Spring Valley. So that's where all my aunts and uncles live and where my grandparents were.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a football mom, not a hockey mom,
Football
right?
mom, basketball mom, trap. That's one of our newer ones. Track. And it's fun to watch. I was not very athletic. I
I
gave it
wasn't
a
either.
try. Let's just say I gave it a try. So,
My athleticism showed up in the band. I was the flag girl.
oh, lucky. I
Yeah.
wanted to do that. And my parents are like, no, piano lessons.
Hey, but you know what? I would rather be able to play the piano than know how to do the flags. So I think you won on that one. So your grandma is the one who this rhubarb recipe came from. Is she the one that lives down in Menominee?
Uh, so they lived in Elmwood, Wisconsin. She passed away actually in 2001. So it's been a really long
Oh,
time. Grandma Lorraine Beckel, those are her muffins. They had a farm outside of Elmwood, Wisconsin, that they had crops and cows. And we were the city slicker kids that lived in New Richmond because we were in the city, which is kind of funny when you think it was a very small town at that time. There was no
mm.
city slicker, but they farmed for many years. She also, for 23 years, was the head cook at the Elmwood Rod and Gun Club. So she catered and did weddings and high school reunions and the fish fries and
Oh,
chicken. So growing up, my aunts and mom would help in the back of the kitchen preparing the food, and we all served for these different events. So that was probably my first real job of making some money, was setting up and tearing down. So she was a
okay.
great cook and baker, and I wish she was around so I could ask more questions.
I think a lot of people think that about their grandparents because when we're younger and they're around, we aren't as interested, maybe, don't think to ask
Right,
those kinds of questions where now we wish we could sit down for hours and ask a lot.
right, exactly.
Those of us from Minnesota and from this area, we know up north.
Yes.
We love up north. And you don't have a place up north, but I think you spend some time around there. Where are some of your favorite places to go? Either Wisconsin or in Minnesota when you go up north?
We do. So growing up, I was lucky enough that my friend's family camped. So we spent a lot of time heading up north. And then for my family, we didn't do Disneyland or anything like that. We headed to Duluth, Minnesota. So
Nice.
Minneapolis, St. Paul area, it's only a 2 hour drive. It's a beautiful drive, whether you head up the Minnesota or the Wisconsin side. And there's a lot to do in the city of Duluth. They've got a great train station. If you have kids to look at the antique trains, you can walk the boardwalk. You could head up further north, and the lake is beautiful. So that's one of my favorites. And then in Wisconsin, on the Wisconsin side, Bayfield is another. My brother-in-law has a sailboat. So that's up
Oh,
there. So we've been able to go out on Lake Superior and go swimming, which is actually crazy because the water's so cold sometimes. But
right.
you find these little coves where it's warmer and it's just beautiful. So those are some of my favorite places to go. A little bit closer to the Twin Cities, I also love Stillwater, which is along the St. Croix. I don't know if you've been there before.
Mm-hmm.
And then Osceola, Wisconsin, again, along the river, some beautiful waterfalls and shops and restaurants. And it's a little bit closer to the Twin Cities, so you don't have to
Yeah,
spend that 2 hour drive. It's only like an hour away. So those are fun. I love those.
sure. We rented a motorcycle once and drove it to Bayfield, Wisconsin, put it on the ferry, and then rode
Oh,
over to Madeline Island and stayed there for a night and kind of
right.
cruised around the island and ate at a cool restaurant. And this is a memorable trip. It's a beautiful area up there.
It really is.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, Madeline Island, we sailed over there. And there was some restaurant. When you were up there, was there some crazy little bar that looked like a tiki hut kind of? Do you
I
remember?
don't remember. It's
All
probably
right.
been at least, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago when we did
Okay.
it.
It was the last thing you would ever think to see. It was just kind of a fun little outdoor place, but all the
Okay.
trees and the water and other sailboats to look at. Yeah, nice.
Let's talk about food and recipes. When did you start liking to bake and to cook and have sort of this passion for or interest in recipes, cookbooks, things like that?
I mentioned before my grandmothers were great bakers. My aunts, cooks too, great cook, great bakers, my aunts and my mom. And the funny part is, growing up, I had no interest at all. My
Hmm.
job was to set the table and clean up. And it would be the late 90s as a young adult. One of my first jobs, I made uh, chocolate strawberry shortcakes and brought them into work. And I even brought the whipped cream in and whipped it at my desk.
Oh my
You
gosh.
know, I thought I would do that. And I just remember a woman whose name was Beverly, and she was eating this, and I can see her face. She looked up and she said, "You made this from scratch?" And I'm like, yeah, not thinking much about it. And she's like, "This is fantastic." And back, I think that was the first time that I'm like, wow, this is kind of cool. I just made something and someone thought it was great.
Hmm.
And then after that, I started trying more, and I would ask my mom questions and I'd give her a call. And when you look at cookbooks today, there's so many instructions. And those older cookbooks, you look and there's hardly anything. And I remember calling going, well, what does this mean?
Hmm.
And she'd be like, I don't know, well, give it a try. And I think at that point, my love of watching cooking shows and what my mom was making and the relatives and getting together and enjoying the food, it just blossomed from there. So, and I love everything from the new cookbooks that come out. I really have to stop myself. Uh, a lot of the times I go to the local library. I think
Hmm.
you do that too, where you check it out first and find
Hmm.
out if it's something you really feel you need.
Yeah.
And then I love the old cookbooks from the antique stores because you never know what you're going to find inside. I just got
Yeah.
one, and there were some recipes, handwritten recipes tucked inside. And I'm going to give them a try
What a
because
treasure.
aren't they? Yeah, I really think so. That's where my love came. And I feel like I need to do something every couple of days because your days are limited and you don't know when you're going to run out of time. And I just want to try things from time to time, make people
Hmm.
happy.
And you still have somebody at home.
Definitely. Jonah is real big into making brownies. There's been a couple of events he's gone to with his friends, and he's like, we got to make some brownies. And I
Oh,
think he's almost
fun.
got it memorized. And our neighbors love it too. When we make things, sometimes we'll just drop things off. I'll put it on the porch and send a text note.
I would like a note like that.
It is nice.
Feeding people. And like you said, Beverly, it was like, you made this, and how she kind of lit up. And then it just warms your heart. It's like a love language. And it's sort of like an artist, you create something, and when somebody appreciates that piece of art or likes it, it gives you a good feeling.
It does. It does. Well,
Hmm.
and going back to sports, I was not good at that, right? So there's no cheering for that, but if I can make a dessert and here's another example. I made a dessert and our neighbor tried it and he said my mom used to make that. Like it
Oh.
brought him back to when his mom would make those things. And
Hmm.
to me, that's the ultimate compliment. You're able to trigger some of those memories and it's happy memories, which is wonderful.
Yeah. What did you enter into a fair? I saw a picture. I think you had entered in some knitting and bread.
I
Do
did.
you do every year? What fair?
So this is my second year with the Pierce County Fair. Prescott, Wisconsin is part of Pierce County. Um, I never did growing up, and it wasn't until last year I thought, oh, I'll give it a try. So this year, I always say I'm not going to enter a lot. My husband's like, "What did you sign up for?" I'm like, "Oh, don't worry, it's not a lot. Most of it's done." So I made a baby blanket that I
Oh.
entered this year, and that will be going to a friend of mine who's due in October, which I'm pretty excited to give her that now.
Hmm.
I had raspberry jam and strawberry rhubarb that we had made, so those were done. I had some pickles, but I didn't read the fine print and the jar was too small, so I was disqualified for that.
Oh, you're a rule breaker.
Rule breaker. Um, I entered my sourdough bread and I made an angel food cake. Angel food is one of the Thomaser family favorites for birthdays. So I entered that, got a blue ribbon for that. So I was excited.
Yeah.
And the last thing I entered was French bread in the yeast category. And there were a ton of things in that category because it was so wide open.
Hmm.
But we make a lot of French bread for our Italian meals. And I thought that would be a good one to give a shot. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Where did you learn how to do all of that? Knitting for one, and then baking bread. That's something I haven't tackled yet. My husband's tried a few different times, quite a few times, and is kind of getting the hang of it, but that's very scientific, I think.
Yes, for sure. Well, I'll start with the knitting part. My mom's name is Judy, and Judy was, in my mind, and I say this a lot, she was Martha Stewart before Martha Stewart became popular.
Ooh, cool.
So she, up until I think I was in sixth or eighth grade, she was at home. She sewed all of our clothes. She canned. All of our meals were done. She knit. I had beautiful sweaters. I didn't own a pair of jeans till eighth grade because she made all of my outfits.
Oh,
So she was the knitter and did not want to teach me. So she sent me to a woman in Richmond who taught me how to knit. So I learned from a woman who had a store at the time. I think it was called Busy Fingers in Richmond. So I made a mauve sweater was one of my first, 1980s mauve sweater, and I
oh
still
man, you've
have
been
it. Yep.
knitting for a long time. Okay.
Yeah, on and off over the years, it gives me something to do. I picked it
Hmm.
up again after the pandemic because everybody was at home looking for something to do. So that and let's see here. Trying to remember what was the second thing you asked? Bread.
Bread. I was wondering how you tackled bread. You were like, I'm just
Bread.
going to give this a try.
Yeah. Well, my grandmother Lorraine used to make bread all the time at home. My mom and her sisters learned how. And then for myself, I took a class many years ago, learned a little bit, kind of left it at that. And just within the last few years, I've started to pick it up again. I wanted to try sourdough, see
Hmm.
what happens. You gotta have that live starter that you take care of. Um, so went from that to making my grandma's homemade bread recipe. There's a few others that are out there. And then now the recipe that I use for sandwich bread, I bake it a couple times a week at night because the boys are eating it. But it's such a simple recipe, it makes it really easy to put together and it turns out every time. So,
Okay.
so it's kind of just learning online. And a woman in Hudson named Amanda is the one that I learned the sourdough from. She's got a website and some YouTube videos out there.
You're not using a bread machine either, right?
No, no. The fun part to me is the feel of the dough as you start to work with it and learn more about it. And I've heard this from older generations too that did things all the time. They just have a feel for it. And like with my French bread, I can tell when that's getting ready. It just has this great feel. And I
Mm.
literally have said to my kids, wash your hands and feel this.
Aw.
Because the dough it's just a beautiful thing to knead and hold on to and then
Mhm.
bake in the oven and have something really cool turn out.
The recipe for the sandwich bread,
Yes,
is it a white bread?
it is. And it's interesting because that one has yeast, flour, salt, honey, which is
Mm.
interesting. It has a just a little bit of sweetness to it. Um, and then you mix it up, it sits for a while, and then you add more flour, a little bit more honey, and then some melted butter. And then you
Okay.
mix it up and it rises, and we make a couple loaves. And you're supposed to let bread sit after it bakes and cool. A lot of people say that. I don't know why. I think it's so you don't, when you cut it, it doesn't deflate as you cut it a
Oh,
little bit. No one at our house can wait. And I
right.
used to say you have to wait. And now I'm like, go for it.
Right.
Go ahead, cut it, put some butter on it,
Warm bread with some
enjoy.
butter.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What how, you were talking about the feel of it, so that's exactly why when we see those vintage recipes, so much was, well, first of all, so much wasn't written down, but when they
No.
did write something down, they certainly weren't doing the feel. They weren't writing down the feel and the look of things, which was very important.
Right.
And those are things we don't know now because they didn't capture them in their recipes. So,
Yeah.
they do their list of ingredients and then mix and then bake. And you're like, well,
Right. You're
what
like,
goes first? And how do, yeah.
exactly. Well, and that's it. If the recipe isn't written using what you add right away, um, do you add the nuts at the beginning or the end? And
Hmm.
I think a lot of those individuals taught the next generation. So if you weren't there to learn that, if it's
Right.
the generation, and that's where I wish I could go back and ask my grandma or watch her, you know.
Yeah. One of the best things I ever did was my grandma's white cookie recipe. She brought them to every like Christmas or whatever. So, I mean, they were a staple for us. And
Yeah.
in her last years, actually her last year at home, we didn't know it then, but her last year in her home, and she wasn't doing any baking anymore. I spent the afternoon with her in the kitchen learning how to make those white cookies
Oh, no.
because the recipe was written down, but it was the ingredients and then basically like mix, roll, and bake. And there were so many other things to it that I took notes while I was baking with her so that my recipe would be a little more detailed because it is by feel. And even rolling them out, it's like paper thin. You can almost see through them.
Oh, wow.
And it seems like they're too thin, but trust us, that's what you do. And
Right.
just the little things that you just don't get from a recipe card.
No, no. And not knowing that, it won't turn out the way you want it to
Mm-mm.
be. And then you're like, something's not right.
Right.
So
They're like,
that's
this is
great.
not like grandma's. Grandma did something different, right?
Right, right.
So describe yourself in the kitchen. What kind of cuisine are you known for, or do you like to make? Are you the kind of person that cleans up as you go? Do you just kind of have this big mess? Do you clean it up, or does somebody else clean it
Uh,
up? Do
I
you use
am
cookbooks?
I'm the queen of cleaning up. I love to clean as I go. I've been trying to teach my husband and my kids that because it really just makes it easier. As
Mm-hmm.
whether you're making dinner or a casserole or baking something, there's always a little bit of downtime where you can quick run some hot water, fill the dishwasher, wash something, clean off the counter. Um, my husband is the barbecuer and smoker. He's the
Mm-hmm.
meat and fish person. So a lot of the times when he's doing that, I'm right behind him cleaning up, washing
Mm-hmm.
it, which is great for him. He loves
Right.
it.
He doesn't do that
So
for you, does he?
They're, you know what, they're getting a little bit better at it. I had a little bit of a meltdown about 2 weeks ago. I'm like, this is too much. And they're like, okay, here. So they're getting better at it. And I want my boys to know that when they're grown, whether they're living with roommates or a spouse, here, help make sure that
Yeah.
everybody takes place and takes part. Cookbooks, I love, like I mentioned before, I love cookbooks. I'm more of a follow the recipe type of person and see how it turns out. And then after that, we might make adjustments, maybe a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more spicy or add more vegetables. My husband, Tom, you give him ingredients and he will whip something up and then it's always fantastic. We're like, did you write this down? He gives
Oh,
us a smile. He's like, no. We're like, okay. So that'll be the first and last time that it's ever like that, but it's great that way too.
do you do digital recipes much? Even if I find something online, I like to print it. Even with my blog, I mean, I have my blog. Sometimes I'll cook or bake from that, like from my phone, but almost always I have almost all of them printed off, or it's a recipe card that was in my recipe box anyway. I'll
Right.
pull out the recipe card and I don't like to look digitally. How about you? Do you like that?
Um, when it comes to my cookbooks, I like having the cookbook. There's always online that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes if there's someone I follow and I'm going to use that person's recipe, whether they have a cookbook or if it's online, sometimes I'll do that, but I do like how you also to print it off and then I know
Yeah.
where it is. And I actually have 3-ring binders. If we like the recipe, it goes into a category like a recipe box.
Yeah.
And another thing that I started doing a few years ago, when I make something out of a cookbook, I write down the date, if we loved it, what we would change, how it worked out, and then also a little bit about what was going on at that time. So let's say I'm
Oh.
making a casserole out of a cookbook and it was a snowstorm. I'll say snowstorm, had to go out and shovel
Mm.
3 times. And it's so fun because years later or a different time you open it to make it. And then you're like, oh, remember we did this? And then
Right.
it just triggers in your mind what was happening at that time. Um, I always worry too, like digitally, I might not be able to find it again.
Right.
Maybe I'll mark it on Pinterest, but then if I go back to it, I'm like, well, did I make any changes? Did I add
Mm-hmm.
anything? Where on paper you can write those notes.
Right. And sometimes those websites or blogs go away or they change
Yes,
things. Sometimes they rename things. And so when you're searching for it, you can't find it because it's not called the same thing.
right.
There's so many variables in that digital that, yeah, I print it if I like it and
Yeah, yeah.
just keep it
That
in my file.
that tomato sauce you mentioned, we
Mm-hmm.
were talking earlier, that's one that I've printed multiple times because her website's gone. And that was a
Oh,
recipe I got from a friend of mine. And she said, go to this website. Luckily, it was there, but now if
mm.
you go, you can't find it.
See, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you, here's my problem. I'm sure you have the same thing because of this cookbook obsession. How do you remember when I even 5 years ago, I would say I remembered better. Like I could tell you exactly which cookbook that this certain soup or something is that I made, and I could go find that exact cookbook out of my hundreds of cookbooks. Well,
Yeah.
100. I don't have hundreds, but as I get older, I kind of like I don't remember which one that one. How do you, if you're making a note, like I made this, it's really good. We made these adjustments. How do you remember what cookbook to go back to?
Yeah. So there's two things that I do with my recipes. If I make something, I take a post-it note and I write the name of that recipe and I attach it to the top of the cookbook. So it's sticking out the top.
Okay.
So let's say it's chicken Alfredo. So that cookbook will have that. And then it also proves to me that I'm using my cookbook so I don't feel so bad if I get more. Look, honey, I brought a few more in. Don't worry, there's
Right.
Post-its. We've cooked out of
We've
these.
been using them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then I found a website. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called Eat Your Books.
Mm-mm.
Have you ever heard of that? Okay, so it's a website that you can join and it's pretty economical. I think it's only like $4 a month. You log in all of your cookbooks and your magazines. So you have your own page. You can type in and they list tons of cookbooks. what happens is you can go in and type chicken Alfredo, and of all of your cookbooks, it will list all the recipes and what cookbook it comes out of. It'll tell you the page, it'll tell you a general list of ingredients. It won't give you the recipe because you have it in the cookbook, but it's a great way to catalog all of your recipes. And so I can go in there and click, let's say Pioneer Woman Chicken Alfredo as an example, made it what the date was. And so I can go back, type chicken Alfredo, and it'll list all my cookbooks and where I can find those. So for my memory, that's slowly disappearing. It's a great way to find that quickly. So it's a pretty cool website.
Yeah, there's got to be, I mean, that pretty rich data in there to have
Yeah,
everything listed. So that's a good idea. I keep journals that I mean, I'll write, hey, we made this, or yeah, like you said, so my husband Jason will make something, and then if he doesn't write it down, so I'll sit down with that book and say, what did you do? And it's like a food journal. It's not like this is what I ate today,
right.
because that would be embarrassing.
Mine would be a long list.
It's more about like we tried this, or we went to this 4th of July thing and here's what I made, and everything disappeared on this, but this plate was still full, or just all kinds of little notes. But
Nice.
you get a pile of those journals, and you can't search that. You have to flip through, and I've had to do that before to find something. And
Definitely. But it's great history, for your family too, to know where you've been and what you made and what people
yeah,
enjoyed. Yeah.
yeah, put like this birthday cake, and it was 12 inches tall and
Wow.
whatever. Remember that
Yeah.
one time? Yeah. So, well, what are a couple of recipes that you are going to share? First, I guess I want to make sure I will, if it's okay with you, I will share your grandma's rhubarb recipe that you gave to me. Can I share that on the
Absolutely.
blog?
For sure.
Here's what I have to tell you about that. So, I'm a texture person. Like,
Yeah.
I don't like certain textures mixing with others. I love like a blueberry muffin, but if there's big chunks of blueberries, I'll pick them out and then just love the blueberry flavor that's left in there.
Right.
And so rhubarb muffins are something that I had not made before, hadn't tried because I assumed I wouldn't like the texture of the rhubarb, but I thought, well, I'm going to try them.
Yeah.
They are amazing.
Oh,
I
good.
don't have a problem with the texture because that rhubarb just, I mean, I cut my rhubarb pretty small, but it's not like they're tiny diced, but
Right.
they just sort of meld into that batter. And every time you take a bite, you're like, oh, I hope I get one of the rhubarbs because they leave that little tart little surprise in there.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because Jonah, my 15-year-old, forget it. Rhubarb, no way, but he loves those muffins.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, please share the recipe and just remind people that there's that cinnamon brown sugar nut top that you add. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't add that before baking, it's not the same.
And one thing I did, I have to say that I did not do, I think you're supposed to put nuts in the batter, and I didn't do that.
Oh,
Just
sure.
kind of like I don't like nuts in my banana bread, that kind of thing.
Right.
So
Right.
I omitted the nuts from the inside, but I did put them in the streusel topping.
Yeah.
But I didn't double the recipe and I'm regretting it. And you wrote on there that you usually double it. And I
Yeah.
thought, well, I don't need that many because I'm not going to like them. They were
Right.
good. And I wish but I
Oh,
have more rhubarb, so I'll make more fresh. But
wonderful.
so then I got to thinking, well, Grandma Janet has to have had, because I have her recipe boxes.
Nice. Yeah.
She died a few years ago, and um, in 2019. So I
Okay.
went to her recipe box and I have in there an almost identical rhubarb muffin recipe,
Really?
except yours uses buttermilk and hers just has milk.
Okay. That's
There's
not
also a streusel topping, although hers doesn't have nuts. It's just sugar, cinnamon, and margarine,
okay.
and not brown sugar. It's just sugar, which yours has brown sugar, and I think that's better.
All right. Well, and it's interesting too because there's no butter. It's just the brown sugar, cinnamon, and nuts,
Yeah.
which you're like, well, it's going to fall off, but it sticks to that batter before it
Mhm.
bakes.
Anyway, it was very, very similar. And so I'm like, well, here I had one all this time that could have
That's
been just
fun.
pretty much the same, but
I'm glad you like them. That makes me happy.
thank you for sharing that with a total stranger.
Yeah. Well, there's so many times that when it comes to food and Instagram or blogs, I send a message out and I tease my husband that that person doesn't know it, but we're friends. And he just laughs, right?
Yep. So what are some other recipes that you'll share with us today?
Yeah. So I was thinking about that, and I know you had a guest on not too long ago that had a potato soup recipe, but there's a delicious ham and potato soup recipe that I
Mm,
want to share.
I
Um,
love
so
soup.
yeah, fall's coming up, and I've got a cool story that goes with it. It's my son Jack's favorite, and when he was at UW lacrosse last year, the catering department, uh, the caterers asked if there were any family recipes because from time to time they'll make it at campus. And then
How
they'll say,
cool.
yeah. So I sent the recipe in. His friends sent him a photo from the dining hall saying, Jack, your soup's here. So it was the ham and potato soup, Jack's name, his hometown. And he's like, are you kidding me? So all of his friends went and had soup that day.
Ah, that
So
is so cool though.
isn't it
Schools
neat?
could do that
Yeah. Yep.
in the school lunch program too. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So
Just
no,
that's really neat.
it's a fun story. So I'll share that one. Another one that is a family favorite and pretty much has become the boys' birthday cake is ho-ho cake. Have you ever had that?
I have not, but if it's chocolate and a white cream
Oh,
filling, I'm in.
you are gonna love it. You know the little ho-hos that you can buy at the
Yeah,
store?
I love
It's
them.
similar to that. So it's a chocolate cake with this white filling, which is a really interesting uh recipe because it's milk and flour that you cook on the stove first. And you
Okay.
let that cool. And then later, once it's cooled, you have butter and sugar and vanilla that you beat up. And so you whip that, then you put the two together and it makes this fluffy frosting. And you'll have to try it. It's so good.
Okay.
It has this chocolate glaze over the top. I'll send a couple pictures where the boys have it as their birthday cake.
Oh,
Um,
that'd be
you
awesome.
can make it as like two rounds, or you can make it as a sheet pan and it travels well. People love it. Yeah, so that's another
Okay.
one I'll share. And then I thought for the other one, it's not baking, but that it's gardening season. Our tomatoes aren't doing so well this year, and I only had
Mm-hmm.
enough to make 2 quarts of this roasted tomato sauce. But it's fantastic and it's easy to make and it's wonderful over spaghetti or in lasagna. So I thought maybe I would share that recipe too.
Sure. Yeah. How many tomatoes do you need for to make a little bit?
So that recipe calls for 28 Roma tomatoes. You know, I think that person
Oh,
was talking about going to the store, but what I do is I take a 9 by 13 cake pan and I fill the bottom of it and just a little bit more to maybe where it's 3/4 full. That makes sense for a cake pan.
okay.
I'll have to go back and count how many tomatoes. I had some Roma, I had some big boys. I just kind of used them all. So it's
Or
the
pounds. I suppose it probably more
yeah,
goes by pounds of tomatoes, but
yeah.
you
I'll
can
have
do
to
a
check
small
that.
batch. It doesn't have to get
No,
big
it's
and
not very big, so you could easily make it and enjoy it for your dinner that evening. And it's
yeah.
got basil and garlic and onions, and you roast it in
Mm.
the oven. And then when you take it out, it's a little bit of tomato paste and balsamic vinegar.
Oh,
So
that's a nice
that's where it's a
addition.
little bit different, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
What all do you grow in your garden?
This year we have tomatoes, a ton of different peppers, uh, green, yellow. There's like a purple looking one.
Mm.
Jalapenos have been going crazy with this weather and the rain.
You guys have gotten a lot of rain. We did at
Yeah,
first, but now our last month or so hasn't been much
it hasn't.
rain.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, this is the first week that it hasn't rained for a while. It's made it very easy for watering the garden.
Yeah. So
Peas,
peppers. Oh,
beets,
peas.
um, eggplant, which I just love, and then I have to figure out what to do with that. So they're pretty to me. And then this year my husband had 800 sweet corn seeds that he planted. Our neighbor has a small tractor and we had bumper corn, sweet corn. So we just froze a bunch of that and handed it out to friends and family. Our whole neighborhood was enjoying sweet corn. We were
Oh,
getting
yeah.
photos of everybody eating it. That's pretty much it for the garden this year.
How do you freeze your corn? Do you freeze it on the cob or do you take it off the cob before you freeze it?
We used to do it. It's gotten to be a bigger job every year. We keep buying more or growing more. This year it was growing. So it started in the kitchen, but now we set up outside and my husband uses one of those, you know how people fry the turkeys
Yep.
outside? It's a similar situation, but it's water, of course. So we take
Yeah.
the cobs, we strip the outside off, we put the cobs in for 6 minutes in that boiling water. We take it out and put it into cold water to stop that cooking process. And then I have a small tool that shaves the kernels off the cob.
Mm-hmm.
It cools completely. We put it into seal bags and we freeze it first before we seal it because they're so juicy, it would make a huge mess.
Yeah.
So by freezing it first before we seal those bags with the seal machine, it keeps all the goodness in there. So,
Sure.
and we just tried this year to freeze some of the cobs and we're gonna see what happens in the middle of winter, if it's as
Mm-hmm.
good. We'll see.
We freeze our cobs. That's what
You
we've
do?
done. We do
Okay.
blanch it and then we freeze them.
Ah,
Even though we've been using a tool afterward to scrape off and then so we're boiling it out of the freezer and then scraping off. Because what I love about that is you get all that milky juice and stuff with it.
yes.
And so I've wondered when you're taking those kernels off and then freezing them, are you getting all that milky juice and stuff to go into that bag with it?
We do. Yep.
Okay.
And so we have a big Tupperware bowl that we put that in and I stir it and my husband will stir it before we put those cups. We usually have 2 to 3 cups per those sealing
Okay.
bags. So all that juice is in there and that's where we found if you try to seal it right away, it makes a huge mess and you get juice all over. But if it's
Okay.
frozen and then we take it out and seal it quickly, all that goodness is in there.
Okay. Because
Yeah,
it takes up a lot less room in the freezer.
right.
And so I just am like, maybe we should take them off of the cob before, but I love to have the milk and stuff of the
Yeah,
corn, and I
yeah,
didn't want to lose that. So
yeah.
maybe we'll try it the other way.
Yeah, give it a big stir and it just kind of mixes. And I always scoop way down so you kind of get a little bit of everything.
Did you have any more recipes or no? I kind of interrupted you. I got
Oh,
off on the garden topic.
oh, we could talk recipes for
Yeah,
days.
I
I
know.
know you had mentioned to share a couple. Um, the name has funeral potatoes in it. So I do have for your podcast.
Yes,
I
yes.
do have a recipe that's my friend Jen's because the boys eat Jen's cheesy potatoes or my mother's cheesy potatoes, but if it's my recipe, they don't like it. And
Okay,
I'm
now
pretty
I
sure
gotta know.
they're a lot alike, but when we make it, it's always Jen's or my mom's.
So
So
what's the difference between all three? Do you
it's
know?
it's funny because I'll have to go look. I was going to do that last night. I think they're pretty similar, and
Hmm.
I don't know because they all have cheese and sour cream, and I'll have to check. I'll have to let you know.
Yeah.
There
You
must
have
be
to let me
something.
know what's different.
Yeah,
Because it'll be funny if there is nothing different and it's just in their
right.
minds that they like Jen's or grandma's over yours, and
Yeah,
yet they're all kind of the same recipe.
exactly.
But I did do something once when I had people send me their funeral potato recipe or cheesy hash brown recipe, and I got a handful in, and each one was a little bit different.
Sure.
Might use a different cheese in there or a couple different, a couple cheeses. I use cream of onion soup in mine.
Oh, interesting.
And other people use cream of mushroom or cream of chicken. I think when I'm doing a big batch, I do cream of chicken and cream of onion.
Okay.
And my sister Callie doesn't put the cornflakes on the top. She doesn't do a
Right.
topping, and I do.
Yep.
But some people will use like Ritz crackers instead on top or potato chips, like sour cream and onion potato chips.
Oh, that sounds good too.
So there's a lot of different ways, but yet they yeah. So it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'll
What do
take a
they
look.
call them?
Cheesy potatoes.
Cheesy potatoes.
Yep.
Okay.
Every single one says cheesy potatoes, but you have to put that person's name in front of it, I guess, if it's going to
Right.
be accepted by the kids.
have to do a taste test. You have to make 3 pans and do
Right.
taste tests, blind taste tests to see.
Blind. Yep, for
Mhm.
sure.
Interesting. Yep, most Midwestern families have some sort of funeral potato or cheesy hash brown. Some people say that they're like, oh, well, to me, I guess funeral potatoes are more au gratin potatoes or scalloped potatoes and ham because that's what they would have or bring to a funeral. I'm
Right.
like, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's that's the way it is around here.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it reminds me of your episode about the fish fries, how like over here on the western side, you get the bun with it, where in other places you get the rye bread, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So I think depending on where you live and what you're used to or what was passed down from family to family, certain things are accepted and others are like, that's not right. Right?
Right. That's not the way you do
You
it.
have your
Yeah.
opinions. Yep.
Yeah. And we didn't have a cheesy hash brown recipe in my family.
Oh, wow.
I didn't grow up on it.
Ah,
No, it was a dish that my kids' grandmother Shirley made for something once when the kids were really little. And I was like, these are amazing. This is kind of like the Cracker Barrel hash brown dish that I like. And oh my
yeah.
gosh, I didn't know you can make it at home. Will you give me the recipe? And she did. And that's kind of how that all started.
Oh, that's cool. Well, that's tater tot hot dish, which
Hmm.
is another Midwestern thing. We didn't have that growing up. So that I remember as a younger adult making it and being all proud because, it's tater tot hot dish and
Yeah.
my boys have no interest in that, but they didn't
Oh,
grow up with it. So,
right.
yeah.
And I did grow up with tater tot hot dish. So now you're in Wisconsin. Do casserole or hot dish? Is
Oh.
everything hot dish for you guys, or is it casserole?
So in our families, it's always hot dish, but I can remember as a young teenager saying casserole and my mother going, "Where are you getting casserole from?" Right? Like, where did you grow up? Because you didn't grow up here. This is hot dish. So it's funny. I a lot of the times will say casserole. And then every once in a while, because of where we live, you're like, oh yeah, it's hot dish. You get
Hmm.
that Minnesota accent going and
Yeah.
you got to get the hot dish out.
I wonder where you got casserole. It was like your
I know,
friends, the word on the street is it's casserole. I mean,
right?
tater tot hot dish. I remember I call it tater tot hot dish, but for some reason it was tuna noodle casserole.
Oh,
I grew
sure.
up in South Dakota.
Hmm.
And so I'm torn because I'm like, well, sometimes it's casserole, sometimes it's hot dish, depending on which thing you're talking about.
Right. And they're all kind of the same, but we've had this conversation with friends, and is it the vessel that you cook it in?
Yeah, because a casserole dish is an actual vessel, a
Right.
casserole.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they say fancy the cassoulet,
Right.
right?
Right.
I don't make tater tot cassoulet. Chickens. I want to talk about your chickens.
Oh, sure.
You have chickens so that you can get the eggs?
We do. It was always a plan. We ended up getting them in 2020. It had nothing to do with the pandemic. It was just timing. I've always wanted to have chickens. My request was that it had to be a bird that did not lay a brown or white egg because I can buy those in the store. I wanted blue, green, pink. So we decided for where we live and the weather that, and I hope I say this right, they're Americana. And and I'll send some pictures of them. They're beautiful birds. Some are black, some are brown, some are black and white. Like I have Pearl right now. She's kind of black and white, but her head is white. They're all beautiful and very distinct. And their names go with it. So we have Marshmallow and Cinnamon, and there's Alyssa Milano, which
Oh
was
my
my
gosh.
husband's crush when he was, a teenager. So they're Americana and they lay pink and blue and green eggs. We're down to one Polish sizzle, and those are the ones that have the Phyllis Diller hair. Like, remember
Oh
Phyllis
yeah, they're so
Diller?
fun to watch.
They're crazy. So that's Little Lady, and she lays a white egg. We had more, but over time, chickens come and go. So I have 9 older girls that are now molting and not producing the eggs. You have to have chickens like every 3 to 4 years, you need to get new ones because depending on the breed, they don't lay as many. So now I have teenagers. I have 11 teenagers. And they're fun to watch and they love being around people. Charlotte is a blackbird and she lets you hold on to her and you pet her and you talk to her and she talks back. My mom calls her the therapy chicken.
Oh,
My mom's not big into holding on to birds and this one she'll hold.
oh,
They're supposed to be in our backyard and in an enclosed area. My husband's actually building on right now. So they have full run of the backyard and they figured out how to get beyond the fence. So we'll sit on the front porch and all of a sudden a chicken goes running by. And then pretty soon more go running by. They're great entertainment.
they're the teenagers, no doubt, right?
It's the teenagers because the older ladies are like, did you say they left the yard today? Yeah. And they tell on each other. You go out to take care of things with the coop and one, Alyssa, she comes up. Oh, you wouldn't believe what happened today. So and so. You could just hear them, like the personalities. She's the tattletale.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh. When
Yeah.
they leave, do they come back? Do you have to go chasing after them?
So many years ago with the first crew, they got out and I was in tears. My husband and I were running through the backwoods. Our backyard backs up to woods. We're trying to corral them. You can't corral chickens. So I'm
Right.
in tears. This time I'm like, they'll be back. And they for the most part stay right around the house and the edge of our woods. And
Okay.
they know predators are in the sky. So they usually come
Oh,
back to the coop and kind of stick by. But yeah, they've been checking out the yard. Yeah.
okay.
So I'm more relaxed this time around, which is funny. My husband's kind of surprised.
But it's like by the time you have your third child, right? You're more
Right.
relaxed than the first one. It's the
Exactly.
same thing.
Right. Oh, you want the cookies? Here you go.
Right.
We did have two pet goats. They're at our friends. We call it summer camp. They're at a larger farm
Oh.
right now. With the boys being bigger and now only Jonah's home, they moved, but the goats would get out and I would worry that they would run away and all they would
Mhm.
do is go to our deck or the front porch and look in the house because they knew we were in there. So yeah, like
Isn't
you said,
it funny
dogs
that they're
run
smart
away.
like that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, like one time I was walking by, I'm going down the hall and I'm like, what did I just see? And I look and Shenanigans was standing on the table on the front porch looking into the house. Like, oh, all right, here we go. So they didn't go far either, which is nice. Thank goodness.
Goats are hilarious to watch. I have a friend, Kathy, who has goats, and I'm like, you just need to post videos every day for us who don't have those because it's sort of therapy to watch these
Oh yeah.
hilarious goats. And my niece Katera has a few. And I just love seeing the videos because they are full of shenanigans. You named one shenanigans.
We had two sisters, Agnes and Shenanigans. They were born on St. Patrick's Day. So
Oh,
we went
okay.
with Irish names, but
Yeah.
Shenanigans fit completely. Yeah. So we
Yeah.
still go visit them at our friends. So it's interesting. They take them on walks. They don't leash them or anything. They've got
Oh,
20 acres and it's mowed a path and they go for a walk every day. So
did you say you have a rhubarb patch? Do you have rhubarb, your own?
we have four plants and I have to check the gentleman you had on, he was so interesting about the different varieties and there's one with a red name in it and I'm pretty sure we have that one. So we have four and they're right along the front of our porch, so it's kind of decorative at the same time,
Yeah.
really easy to get to.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's do you ever take the stalks and dip them in sugar and take a bite?
I don't, but that's what Jan Sanderson from Sanderson's Gardens that he said they did as a kid. They just put, sugar in the palm of their hand and just dip it in there. I don't
Yeah.
really remember that, but
We did it as kids and I tried that and it wasn't the treat I was looking for. Much,
wasn't like
much
the ho-ho
better.
cake, right?
Right, right. It's much better to bake grandma's muffins, that's for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He drove me out to the rhubarb patch and then he showed me what he was talking about with those tiny little stalks. So you have a
Yeah.
stalk that you might pull out, but then there's a little tiny shoot coming off of it that has a little rhubarb stalk. And he said
And
those
it's
are really,
green, like it has the green leaves at the top of the stalk.
yeah, it has a little tiny green. It's kind of like when you get celery, and once you break open the celery, you get down to some little tiny little stalks, but yet it
Right.
still has the green leaf on the top.
Uh-huh.
And if you break that off, he just had me eat it out in the field there, and you take a bite, and it's just a sweet little, it's a different experience than the big stalks, those little
I
tiny
was
ones.
I was wondering what that was that he was talking about. So I'm glad that you explained that because I've seen that. I'll have to try it.
Yeah. How about cocktails? It looks
Oh,
like you do different cocktails. So what's your favorite?
yeah, that was something that we started a couple years ago. I won a cookbook that's all cocktail recipes and it sat forever on the shelf and my husband picked it up one day and he's like, I'm gonna make us something. So he's our mixologist. Tom's
Hmm.
always trying different things. He's an engineer, so his brain's really good at mixing and trying different things and he makes his own old fashions using the maple syrup that we make. So I just sit back and wait and see what he brings me, and then I take a great photo wherever we are, if it's inside the house or out by the flowers. And we've been trying a little bit of everything. And I find I like more, I don't like things overly sweet. So he's
Mm,
been finding some great recipes that are a great cocktail, but it's not sugary sweet. And it's not
sure.
overly alcohol boozy at the same time. So
Hmm.
yeah, I don't mind when he says I'm gonna give something a try. It's always fun to see what he has.
Maple syrup. You guys do maple syrup too? You tap your trees?
We
My gosh.
do. So it's kind of funny. We moved 9 years ago out to the country. And I'll back up a little bit. My dad's side of the family, my grandfather and his family tapped maple trees and made maple syrup. My uncle and my cousin continue that on that family land. So when we moved to outside of Prescott, it's Oak Grove. Well, there wasn't one maple tree to be found. So I was really sad about that.
Yeah.
However, near the river, because of where we live, there's a community space there's a beach area and
Hmm.
it's very primitive. You have to take your ranger to get there. There's some maple trees. So my husband tapped back in 1920 or in 2020, sorry, and gave it a try. So we've been continuing that process. And we get, I would say maybe 6 or 7 quarts, maybe he'd probably say more, but it's kind of a fun thing to do because it's keeping that family tradition going.
Hmm.
I'll send you the photo. It's really cool. There's a picture of my grandfather who lived into his 90s. I think he was 97 or 98. When he was just 2 or 3, it's a picture of him, his older sister, his brother, and my grandmother in the woods as they were cooking down this sap. So it's a great
Wow.
black and white picture. So it's a fun family tradition to keep going.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and is this in the springtime
it
you're
is.
tapping?
Yep,
Okay.
about March, April, depending on the weather. I think you have to have warmer days and cooler nights where it gets below 32 degrees. And it has to do with the sap and the trees and the running of the sap. So when
Okay.
you tap that tree, depending on the time and the weather, you get that sugar water that comes out of the maple
Mm.
trees.
Is it just a 1 day thing for you guys, or is it multiple days? Is it weekends?
It's so you tap the trees and depending on the season, this could go on for weeks if you wanted. There's some
Oh.
larger family farms where they go and they make tons of maple syrup. And ours is maybe a 2 week process, depending
Oh.
on the weather and how much time we have. So we collect the sap during the week. And then on the weekends, he's got a contraption that you throw the wood in and it boils. And
Okay.
uh,
Is
yeah,
it enough for you guys like to last a year from like year to year doing it?
pretty much my philosophy on what we can or preserve is don't use all of it up because you never know what the next year is going to be like. Save a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So we usually get enough where we can enjoy our pancakes and waffles and things like that. And then we'll can smaller jars that we'll give to friends and family.
Oh.
If we have someone who comes and stays with us, it's a nice little thing to give away.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on the year. Sometimes you get a lot, sometimes you don't get hardly any. So
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah, like this year you got a ton of corn. What if you don't get much next
right.
year? You want to make sure you have some in the freezer.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of getting to the end here, but I want to ask some things for you to share, just being from Wisconsin and Minnesota, working in Minneapolis, knowing the area, just being from the Midwest in general. And
Yeah,
I love getting recommendations from people. So I want to know, first of all, hidden gems. So in the Midwest, are there any places that you can think of that are hidden gems, like only the locals would know about?
that's a good question. Um, so I'll give a couple of examples. St. Paul, there is something called the Gopher Bar. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-mm.
It's a really small bar. It's been there for many, many years, and they serve coney dogs. And they
Hmm.
are the best coney dogs you will ever have. So that's in
Okay.
St. Paul. And it's interesting because sometimes people have no idea about it, and then you'll find someone who does, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, you know about it too, right? Like you've been
But
there.
you have to
Oh, good.
whisper it.
Yeah, yeah. You're like, oh my gosh, it's so good. We just took my mom and dad a couple weeks ago, and my dad said it's the best coney he's ever had. So with the coney
Okay.
dog, they have the bun and it's grilled. It's got the dog. It's got chili on top, onions and cheese.
Mm.
Fantastic. Um,
Okay.
that's one of my favorites. Um, so being that I work in Roseville, I have to just throw out, there's so many wonderful restaurants that are popping up. There's a new one that just opened on Friday called Centro.
Okay.
And it sounds like they had food trucks in some other locations, but this is its first
Oh,
standalone restaurant. Street tacos, fantastic. So I think a lot of people are going to discover that that's here. Minneapolis and St. Paul, we've got a lot of great gems. So depending on if you're looking for like Vietnamese, there's a restaurant called Misant that's fantastic. And they do egg rolls, spring rolls, Asian sandwiches. They make their own bread.
mm.
That's here in Roseville. It's fantastic. Just a few miles down the road, it's right on the edge of St. Paul, Maplewood, and Roseville. It's Highway 36 and Rice Street. There's a bakery called La Delicious Bread. And the gentleman who started that, he's Hmong. His family lived in Paris. They moved to the United States. And to make a very long story short, he started this bakery, and it's all these wonderful French pastries, macaroons, and they have sandwiches too. So that's another beautiful hidden gem that I love. And then I have to mention, I live outside of Prescott. If you take Prescott, Highway 35 is the river road, and you can go all the way down through these wonderful small towns. And I've shared this with other people. I'll send you these different locations and some of the
Okay.
restaurants and shops along the way.
Okay.
That's a great drive if you're in the Twin Cities just to get out for the day. You start
Mm-hmm.
in Prescott, and there's Stockholm and Maiden Rock and Pepin, where there's a beautiful winery that looks like you're in Italy. Um, you can head all the way down to Nelson, Wisconsin, where there's a cheese factory and they do pizzas and ice cream, and you can pick up cheese and meats. And if you want, you can turn around and head back, or you can cross over into Minnesota, into Wabasha, where
Oh,
the Eagles, there's I forgot the name of it. I'll have to look it up. You can go and watch the Eagles along the river. It's an
okay.
educational center. And from there, you can head right up Highway 61 back to the Twin Cities. So that's another hidden gem for a day trip, I think.
Right.
And I can share all that with you because I love giving people opportunities to go find things that they love.
Right. How about a favorite bakery or patisserie?
Okay, so going back, that La Delicious bread,
Mm-hmm.
that is one of my favorites because they have a wide variety. It's all genuine French desserts. That's a fun one to pick up items and go share with your friends.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I
Okay.
do like that one.
So my sisters and I are always on the hunt for good Mexican food, and we go to the cities on our annual sisters trip this year, and it's in October.
Oh, good.
And we have been searching for good Mexican. Where do you go for good Mexican up there?
All right. Well, again, I have to toot Roseville's horn. The there's actually three that I love that are right here. Centro, which I mentioned, just opened up.
Okay.
So I just had yesterday the street tacos. They do crunch wraps. There was
Mm,
this wonderful hibiscus lemonade. Um, that's a fun one, and it's very Instagram worthy on the inside and on the outside. So if you and your
okay.
sisters want to take your photos, I would highly recommend that. They've got a great outdoor patio that you can go out and
Oh,
eat. Um, that's a great one. La Casita in Roseville is you get platters and it's tons of food. They have a lot on the menu. There's lots to choose from. Prices are fantastic. That's a great one. Whether it's just a couple of people or if you have a large group, I like that one
mm,
too because they do a fantastic job of making you feel welcome and enjoying the food. Uh, and then the third one that I really enjoy is La Tapatia, and that's in Roseville also.
okay.
Uh, family-owned restaurant, and they have recipes that come from their family who are in Guadalajara, Mexico. So
Okay.
their recipes are a little bit different from the street tacos that you have at Centro or what you get at La Casita. So you might have to try all three when you
Right.
go with
Well,
your sisters.
I'm game for that.
Yeah.
That just reminded me, have you ever heard of Gracie's in Owatonna?
No. Okay.
Back in the mid 90s, we had discovered this place called Gracie's, and it was only the locals would know. And there's probably even locals that don't know about it. It is
Wow.
such a hidden gem. And it was a tiny place where there were only a few tables. So you basically sat with everybody, you just shared, you just found a seat and sat down. But authentic Mexican. I figured the place was long gone by now because it's been forever.
Right.
But I came across what I'm pretty sure is a Facebook page for Gracie's in Owatonna. It's still in that tiny little place that you have to find. And
Yeah.
so, anyway, if you're ever in that area, because if I'm ever back over there, I'm going to go find
That's where you're
it.
gonna go.
I
Yeah, I
mean,
was just in Owatonna about a month and a half ago, so that's a real easy place to get to from the Twin Cities. So
mm-hmm,
we'll have to
mm-hmm.
check that out.
All right. Well, any other cool spots that you want to share? Bookstores, vintage places, bars, antique stores, anything?
Yeah, antique stores, I love that because so many times you can find the antique cookbooks or
Yeah.
dishes and things. Not too far from Roseville in St. Paul on Selby Avenue, there's two antique stores that I like. And I think somebody else had mentioned them at one time. One is the Missouri Mouse.
Oh, yeah. So, when we did Betty's Antiques,
Yeah,
the
yes.
episode for that. Mm-hmm.
Yep, and Betty's is fabulous too. I've stopped in there. After you talked with them, I went
Oh, okay. I
after work
still
and
haven't
stopped
been able to
in.
get there, but yeah.
Yeah, it's very cool. And then there's another one, I think it's the Antique Mall or St. Paul Antique Mall, and that's right up the street from the Missouri Mouse.
Okay.
And what I find interesting when I go there, there's a lot of young people that are in looking around in their
Oh,
20s, in their 30s. And I find it very interesting because they're searching for things they remember from their childhood or their grandparents, or they're adding to their own collection of whatever they're looking for. I just find it
mhm.
very cool to see young people in the antique stores.
Definitely. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll end here. Do you have social media? Are you on social media that you want to share with people?
I am, like I mentioned before, I'm just a regular Joe Schmo person. I don't have a blog or anything, but I love all the things that we talked about today, and I love meeting new people. I'm on Instagram and it's under Shan Photos 17. I'm also on Facebook, Shannon Thomaser. So if you love baking and all these things that we were talking about and looking for new friends, totally would be open to that. And again, like I said, I love letting people know about places to go and see here in the Twin Cities. So my work email, I can send that to you. Always love putting itineraries together and ideas for people when they're coming to the area.
And you're the expert for that, so I highly
It's so
recommend
much
it. Yeah.
fun. Yeah,
What would you miss about the Midwest if you moved away?
that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is the seasons. We're so
Mm,
fortunate to have the seasons, and I remember my dad as a kid saying, life goes faster as you get older. And as a young person, I'm like, what is he talking about?
Right.
And
When a
now
school
I
year
know,
lasted forever and yeah.
right. Summer, didn't have to worry about school clothes and things.
Mhm.
Um, he was right. And I just know as I get older, that is such a true statement. So I'm really trying to stop and enjoy each season that we're in and what it gives to you. Um, Working in hospitality, we're always thinking of the future, right?
Yeah.
So we're looking down the road of what events are going to be taking place. So I really have to stop and enjoy what we have. And I think I would miss the seasons because there's so many different things that this area gives to us. Um, snowshoeing in the winter, the garden in the summer, the lightning bugs at the beginning of June, you know.
Mhm.
So I really try to enjoy that. I would miss that the most.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. And you might not think of it until you don't live here anymore and then realize you don't get those certain things. You just think you're
Right.
moving away from the snow or the
Right.
cold, but
Right.
there's a lot more to miss.
Yeah. Well, we like
Yeah.
those woolen mittens. I mean,
Yes, we do.
yes.
Do you knit those? Have you ever knitted mittens?
I have done that in fingerless gloves, which was quite a task. I've made one pair and that's the only pair
That
that
was
I,
it.
yep. I did make leg warmers.
Oh, there you go. Awesome.
Yeah,
Last question.
sure.
If you were invited to an outdoor party in the fall, what dish would you bring to share?
Oh, in the fall. Um, there's there's so many recipes that you want to try. And
Yes.
that's the fun part. And a lot of the times I'll try something and then I'll apologize. Oh, if you don't like it, it's okay. It's a new recipe.
Mm,
But there's one for a pumpkin bar that has a cream cheese frosting that every time I bring that to a get together, they're gone.
mm.
And it makes a big pan and it's the perfect item for a get together in the fall. And adults love it, kids love it. It's easy to make. That's the one that I would use.
Yeah, you can't beat a good pumpkin bar with cream cheese frosting.
No,
So much good stuff. I can't wait to see these recipes and try out some of those restaurants and the bakery.
this has just been a lot of fun. I've never done anything like this before. I have a feeling we're going to be really good friends and stay in contact.
I think so
Um,
too.
I think we could talk for a very long time. And it's always fun to find people that these are the passions and the things that they love.
Hmm.
So it's fun to connect and yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. You're just lovely. So I'm really
Oh,
thankful
thank
that I
you.
got to meet you today. And yeah, pretty soon I have a little handful of people that I've been able to meet this way from up in the cities. Well, I'll just have to get together like at
Oh,
one time because so many people are the same, they like the food and the home recipes and the
yeah,
Midwest. And I just think a gathering of all of us would be a really neat thing.
that
So,
would be fun. Yes.
mhm.
And when we do that, we have to have some stocking hats with your logo on it. We can all wear those.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know Jason keeps telling me you need to get some merch.
Yeah. Well, and in your blog and the podcast, it's been enjoyable. I've got that drive from Prescott to the Twin Cities, and that's when I listen. And I was going through to see if there were any that I missed, and there's so many I've listened to that I need to listen to again because
Oh,
oh, that was good. And your recipes that you share and the things that people share, it's fun.
I love learning all the new things and talking to people, and there's nothing better.
No, I agree.
I like to listen to them too. I'll listen to them. I mean, I create them and then put them out there and then I'll listen to them. And I love to listen to them later. And I always end up finding myself just like driving down the road and I'm just smiling. And
Yes. Yep.
I'm like, yeah, I would listen to this if it wasn't mine. I mean, this is exactly what I wanted.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and there's so many times that I'll be listening and I'll look at the time on the radio because I'll make a mental note that when I get back home, I have to check that spot out so I can write down what I missed. Because when
Mm,
you're driving, you can't take notes
right.
or go to the
Right.
website and yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, well, thanks for sharing everything and being so agreeable to come on. And it's been fun.
It has been fun. Yeah.
Thanks, Shannon.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks.
Isn't that incredible how much Shannon does? I'm just blown away. She runs circles around me between all of her baking and cooking and bread making and canning and entering into the fair, and then she's knitting baby blankets and gardening, and then she has teenage chickens running around. I think that whole Martha Stewart vibe from her mom Judy really rubbed off on Shannon too. If you want recipes from this episode, including Grandma Lorraine's Rhubarb Muffins and all the places Shannon put together for itineraries for you along the river, you'll find them on randomsweets.com. I hope your summer's winding down well and that you're listening to podcasts while you're still spending some time outdoors. I'm your host, Stacy Mergenthal. Sweet wishes.